Okay, I've got it. Thanks. So this is our midday version of our program. At this point, we have a spectacular panel assembled here for a conversation. We have Ann Patchett, Richard Russo, Amor, Towles. Ann Patchett is the author of 7 novels, including Commonwealth and a little-known novel called Bel Canto, which of course won the Orange Prize and the PEN Faulkner Award, et cetera, et cetera. She was the editor of the Best American Short Stories in 2006 and has written 3 books of nonfiction, including This is the Story of a Happy Marriage, a collection of essays examining the theme of commitment. Her books have been both in the New York Times Notable Books and New York Times bestsellers, and she has received numerous awards and fellowships. In 2011, Ms. Patchett opened Parnassus Books in Nashville, and she has since become a spokesperson and champion for independent bookstores and independent owners throughout the United States. Richard Russo is the author of 8 novels, 2 short story collections, and the memoir Elsewhere. In 2002, he received the Pulitzer Prize for Empire Falls, which, along with Nobody's Fool, was adopted into films. His 2016 best-selling novel, Everybody's Fool, was featured in the 2016 Martha's Vineyard author series. Russo's latest trajectory is a collection of 4 short stories. As his reviews have noted, few authors do male vulnerability as well as Richard Russo, and he is the master of self-deprecation. He lives in Portland, Maine. Amor Towles. Oh, and Ms. Patchett has reminded me, he also has a bookstore.
My daughter has a bookstore.
Amor Towles was born and raised in the Boston area. He graduated from Yale University and received a master's in English from Stanford University. His first novel, Rules of Civility, was a New York Times bestseller and was named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the best books of 2011. His second novel, A Gentleman in Moscow, published in 2016, was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 20 weeks in hardcover. Having worked as an investment professional for over 20 years, Mr. Towles now devotes himself full-time to writing in Manhattan. Thank you very much for turning.
So, we got an email asking us if we wanted a moderator, and we all agreed instantly that we did not. That we were trained professionals and that we could do this on our own. So let's knock it out of the park, guys. And we each had a question. Do you want to start?
I'll start
With yours?
Yeah. First of all, I should say, I don't own a bookstore. So
that
I'm behind.
glaring omission is very evident.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Catching up, trying to catch up.
Although your wife has a store in which she sells your book.
That's true.
So that's pretty great.
We're advertising in Vineyard Haven, Magnetic North. That's right.
The important first step to having a bookstore.
That's true. One of the places we thought might be interesting to start is about process. Ann and I had dinner in Texas earlier this year, and as we were talking about our approach to writing, one of the things that I thought was terrific is that I mentioned 2 aspects of my process, and she was doing the exact opposite thing in hers in this regard. And so, but anyway, so I thought I'd like to open it up by asking you guys to kind of go through from inspiration to drafting to editing, sort of how you approach the process of bringing your books into the world.
That would be you, sir.
I'm looking at you.
Well, I'm still back on the what were the 2 things the 2 specific things that that you.
I want to know what you're. I don't remember. I just remember that they were different, but I don't remember what yours were.
Okay.
Oh, you'll get to that.
All right. Process. Do I have a process? I suppose I do.
Just a product.
I don't think about it very much. I suspect also that I just turned 68, and whatever my process is now probably was not my process, 30 years ago. That said, usually what I'm trying to figure out early on is whether or not this notion that I have is or will ever be a book. And until you figure that out, you're going to have an awful lot of anxiety. And over the course of my career, what has generally worked for me is to look for two elements. And the first is a character worth hanging around with for roughly 5 years, because that's how long it takes me to write a book. And I don't like hanging around with bores anymore when I'm creating them and writing about them any more than I do in real life. So the first job one is to find someone that I know a little something about, certainly not everything, but I know a little something about, and probably have at least a degree of, if not affection, some kind of admiration, some sort of interest. I'm intrigued in some way by someone. So that's the first thing. Here is this somebody I just want to hang around with for the next 5 years, because it's a long time. The next thing for me is to figure out what some sort of problem that this person has that he or she doesn't know how to solve, and even perhaps more importantly than that I don't know how to solve. So, I'll take a Sully in the first in Nobody's Fool. The key for me, I knew immediately that I wasn't going to have any trouble spending time with him for 5 years, because he was based on my father, and I didn't see much of my father when I was young. My parents separated, and so I didn't see much of him, and he became interested in me when I became of legal drinking age. And so there were a number of years there where we were father-son, but also drinking buddies. And it wasn't that long after all of that that he became ill. And so I didn't see much of him as a kid, and then I saw him, as a young man. And then suddenly he was gone again. And so the idea of spending 5 years with my father, who was in life an enormously entertaining man, the idea of spending another 5 years with him in his company, of course, was wonderful. So I didn't have any problem with that. The question is, though, for this character, who might start out as my father, but who was going to evolve into someone else, as he did, was what sort of problem could I give this character that I did not know how to solve? And I remember writing quite a bit about the character, but it was really my discovery, probably after writing 75 pages or so of this character, that he had fallen off a ladder and shattered his knee. And his problem then is that this is a man who's done hard physical labor all of his life. He's just turned 60. And because of his shattered knee, he can't work anymore. The problem is he also can't not work anymore, because that's who he is, and that's what his life has been for 60 years. He tries briefly to go back to school with a bunch of 18-year-olds, and it doesn't work out well. So what do you do? So what do you do if you can't work and you must work? And there's no weaseling out of either of those things. Your knee is broken. They're not going to be able to fix it, and yet you have to do the thing that you know you can't do. What do you do? Well, I had no idea. And that for me is a good sign. That's the best thing that can happen, is to have somebody that I care about with a problem that I don't know how to solve, turn them loose, and then strive for 2 or 3 pages a day. Really small bites. I never think about where it's necessarily where it's going to end up. But 2 or 3 pages a day, if I can, small bites, chew thoroughly, swallow, repeat. That's my, you asked a question, it took me a while to get there, but that's my process. Small bites, chew thoroughly, swallow, repeat.
Why is it? I always come up with that exact same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what you said, and 2 or 3 pages a day, for me, I think 1 page a day. If we actually wrote 1 page a day, we'd have a book in a year.
Well, something the size of a book we would
But,
have.
yeah.
It would be to the untrained eye.
You know, it sounds like a small bite, but it's a huge chunk.
Yeah.
Actually, if you
Yeah.
try to do it with any regularity.
Yeah.
But I'm in Camp Russo. It takes a long time. It's got to be an idea that's not going to bore me. It's got to be something really complicated. It's got to be something that just exceeds my grasp. So in every book, hopefully I've learned something, and in the next book I'm doing something that's just a little bit harder than what I'm capable of doing, and I have this sense of always jumping up. I have all of these weird visual images of myself, but one of them is always jumping up for a bar that I can't quite get to. I have some sort of central problem that is only for me, it's not for the reader. So in Bel Canto, it is, how do you write a book in which nobody speaks the same language? What happens then? Or, how do you write a book that takes place over 24 hours? Or how do you write a book in which time is suspended? Or how do you write a book in which the main characters can't communicate? That I don't think anyone is ever going to read the book and say, oh, well, clearly this is about this problem. But that's the thing that really keeps me engaged and going over time. Yeah, so much of it is that I just want to learn, and also that I'm playing out different aspects of my own life. I think about It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart and how he gets to come back and see what his life would have been like without him. That's very central to writing a novel for me. So if the books are not autobiographical, they are still me thinking about my own life going in another direction. I interviewed Zadie Smith on stage a few months ago for Swing Time, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And I was asking her about this idea of the autobiographical novel, because there are a lot of elements in Swing Time that one would assume would be autobiographical to Zadie Smith. There are a lot of elements in Commonwealth that one would assume would be autobiographical to me, and that are. And she said, yes, it is true, it is autobiographical, but I'm not the daughter, I'm the mother. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. And she said, and I'm not the mother in the book. It's that the mother in the book is who I am afraid I will be with my own children. And I'm like, that's it. That explains how fiction is autobiographical. It's not this is the person you are, it is that this is the person you're afraid you'll be. And you're working it out.
Yeah. I remember just briefly, I was reading a wonderful book by Olivia Lang called The Lonely City. And she looks at, I think, 5, 6, maybe 7 artists. Andy Warhol is one, Edward Hopper is one. And Edward Hopper is famous for saying that when asked what he was painting, he said he was always painting himself. And clearly, if you look at Edward Hopper's work, any of his work, clearly it's not self-portrait in any kind of conventional way.
Yeah.
But that's how he described his paintings as including Nighthawks. He's painting himself.
Yeah, me. I guess I generally start with a premise, which is like a sentence. Somewhere along the way, I'm like, oh, the guy gets trapped in a hotel for 30 years. And it's like that's kind of interesting. And write that down. And so those kind of flutter out, and then eventually, like in my spare time, while walking, while driving, at church, whatever, I'm like thinking about one of those little premises, and eventually one of them starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It opens up. I can kind of see, the landscape around it, and the events start to unfold, but as you say, it starts with people. As you say, it's a 4-year, 5-year investment for me too. I gotta like the people involved. I even gotta like the unlikable people involved.
Or especially
the unlikable people. And, but then I start to build the thing. So I am an outliner because of that. Because I will dwell and dwell and dwell and dwell on the premise until it is fully realized in my head and ultimately on paper. So I'm like a 40-page outline kind of person before I start chapter 1, with all the events and all the people and the settings. After this sort of 2 years of dwelling on the idea.
Yeah, and I do that in my head.
Yeah, okay.
I just don't write it.
You don't write it down. And this is that. So then what I do is I find that I spent 7 years writing a book that I didn't like, which I've never submitted for publication. Which is, and it's a piece of advice: is if you spend 7 years on a work of art and you don't like it, you should reflect on that. It's a long time. But one of the things that came out of that is I felt like the parts that I was laboring over in year 3, 4, and 5 were leaden to begin with, in the middle, and after work. There was something about the early effort that felt very light and vibrant. So I try to write the first draft really fast. For me, like in a year. But then I'll revise the thing from beginning to end multiple times.
Sure.
3 times.
Yeah.
And then I share it with like 5 people when it's done on the same day. And this is where Anne.
That's
so,
right.
so Anne, she goes, what you mean you write the whole first draft, but you don't perfect chapter 1 first before going on to chapter 2? And I'm like, no. She goes, I always perfect chapter 1. Really? You gotta be kidding. She said, no, absolutely. I would never go on. And then she's like, you give them to 5 people in the same day? And I said, yeah. She goes, I give it to 1. I don't want to waste the other 4 people's time. Then I felt really bad, wasting the time of my friends. I never even thought about it. But,
Anne will do that.
Yes. Right.
Or just make you feel really guilty.
Am I going to have to get
It's the Catholicism. It's the Catholicism.
Anne Hubbard.
Yeah, right.
Spend too much time among nuns.
Yeah. It's really true, because my point was, if I send my manuscript to Miley Malloy, and she makes all the Miley Malloy fixes, then I'm like, gosh, this is so much better. Then I'm going to send it to Elizabeth McCracken. So I feel like if I send it to them at the same time, they'll find the same problems and it'll waste their time.
And that's what I said for me, because this is repeating our conversation, is for me, I like
without the salsa.
Without the salsa.
Yeah.
I like to give it to 5 people because I want to hear kind of how their responses vary. How they look at the same scene and see it a different way or take it a different way, because I like to sort of chew on that. How do these 5 different views that are slightly different but overlapping a little bit, what do they tell me about the strengths and weaknesses of what I've got so far?
You're canvassing.
Yeah, in a way I'm canvassing.
Yeah.
That's right.
So who reads for you?
Well, my wife. No professional writers. But I want to go back to something that Amor was saying earlier about the difference, because you perfect chapter 1 before you move on to chapter 2. You don't do that. When I said earlier that my process has changed, that's one of the areas where it's changed most drastically. And I find it interesting too, just as a function of age, because when I was writing my early novels, I had this sense, and like you, I would write straight through, write the draft straight through, and then spend time revising. What I find fascinating about that kind of psychologically is that strikes me as a kind of young guy's chutzpah. And what was amazing about that, as I look back on it now, is that my thought process always was, I would look back at what I wrote the day before or the day before that, and it was ugly in the extreme. I mean, there's just sentence to sentence writing was god awful. Whole sections of it you'd look at and you'd think, that's never going to survive. You would see the thing that you had done in all of its misshapen ugliness. But my psychological response to that was the same as what filmmakers talk about when they say that they will fix it in post, right? That, all right, you didn't get the shot you wanted, the actor didn't deliver the line the way you imagined it. There are all of these problems. The sun went behind the cloud at the exact wrong moment. All of these things lead you to believe that this is a mess. Do it again. Do it again tomorrow. Get it right before you move on. And then there are other people who just say, all right, it's messed up. It's messed up, it's messed up. We do it again tomorrow. Sun's going to go behind the cloud tomorrow, too, probably. Anyway, we have all this digital technology now. It's not good. We know it's not good. But you know what? It's good enough for today. We'll fix it in post somehow. What we can't fix today, we'll find some technological, we'll find some way to fix it. And that's the way I was as a younger writer. I could look at this and think to myself, all right, it stinks. I'll figure it out later. The reason I say that that's a young guy's chutzpah is that I don't think I understood back then how hard it was to write a novel and to get it right. Mm-hmm. I do know now how hard it is to write a novel. And because I know how hard it is to write a good novel, the anxiety over something that is clearly screwed up is more than I can bear at age 68. Whereas it was all perfectly fine with me at age 35 to just blow through things and know that they sucked and just assume you'll fix it later.
Okay, I want to say this morning my husband and I got up and we got in the car and we were going to drive to the beach at Linden Cove. And we were supposed to go north, and we went west, and then we came back, and we went south, and then we came back. And, I mean, we just kept getting it wrong. It wasn't a big deal. It's an island. We would drive a little ways out, and we would realize we were wrong, and we would go back. And we would drive a little ways out, and we would go back. And that's what writing a novel is like.
Except that the novel is not an island. You can go forever. You can go forever in the exact wrong direction.
And you're not going to fix. The way I work, I am not going to fix it by continuing to go in the wrong direction. I'm going to go out. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back. I have to start from the right point. And so if I sit down and I write 5 pages in a week, and they are the wrong 5 pages, and I'm going in the wrong direction, and I know it. I always know it. And I try to lie to myself and say, I think I might be able to work this out. This really might be, but it's wrong. And I keep throwing it away and going back. So I don't go more than 10 miles in any direction that is wrong. I know it's wrong. I come back. I start again. I know it's wrong. Because I want to get to Linden Cove Beach. And it was lovely.
Do you know when you say that, when you say you know it's wrong, I'm just curious, do you know it up here? Have you figured out what's wrong with it in your head, or it's just a feeling?
No, it's a sound. It is so tonal. It's just, I am hitting the wrong note. Mm-hmm. It can even be a lovely note, but it's the wrong note. And I just know that it's the wrong note.
That's a gift in itself.
You bet.
You had a question.
I did. We've kind of touched on it a little bit already. So I'll ask a slightly different version of it and come at it through the back door. My question has to do with a kind of truism, which is that it's something that many of us who have taught tell our student writers, which is to write what you know. And it's basically good advice for a lot of people. Better than to send them off to write about a place that they've never lived in among people who have the kinds of jobs that you yourself have not done. All these, the more that you have to invent as a result of having no experience in it, the more difficult your job becomes. So, write what you know is often good advice for beginners. However, a lot of writers, and I certainly consider myself one of these, I have a fairly narrow bandwidth of what I'm really most interested in. A fairly narrow bandwidth. And I find myself, what I am interested in, I'm interested in intensely. And I find myself going back to certain obsessions over and over and over again. And that suggests to me an essential mystery. There's something that I'm after, and I can't even articulate it to myself. But whenever I write a book, it doesn't solve the mystery. The mystery remains.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that, in a sense, I'm writing what I know, but what brings me back to it is what I don't know, which suggests that the opposite aspect of that that whole issue is, on the one hand, write what you know, but on the other hand, there has to be some fundamental mystery about what you're after that doesn't ever quite get solved. The itch, no matter how much you scratch it, continues to itch, or should. Which, in a way, suggests that maxim, write what you know, there's something equally powerful that suggests the exact opposite. And that also suggests something, I think, about art in general, is that many things contain their own opposites. So I'm curious what you think about this because we're curious about the world, and both you and Amor, I think, have a much wider bandwidth of interest by reading both of your works. You have a much greater curiosity about the world than I do, and a much wider bandwidth. So how do you balance, what you know, what you don't know, and what seem to be the obsessions from book to book?
You want to go?
Sure. I guess I'd start by saying, I think that the write what you know maxim is way over top. Mm-hmm. So yeah, now I clearly have almost a political position about that. I feel like there's a lot of young writers who would benefit from being encouraged to explore and experiment as a part of the creative process as young people, rather than sort of stacking up the next book about my life in high school when my parents were getting divorced, top of another. And so the fact that it's about you doesn't make it interesting or better or well written. So I do think that exploration is a very valuable thing, particularly for certain types of young writers and who can really dig into that. And also, Shakespeare, didn't write what he knew, in the sense that he wasn't writing about his life in a particular quarter of London at a particular time. But he and both of you, we're all interested in the human condition. And I do think that you try to take your own experiences as a way of sharpening your understanding of the human condition. I think there's nothing wrong then about transporting yourself into a different environment and trying to grapple with the human condition, having set yourself a puzzle to solve. Which is and that's for me the Shakespearean project. He's constantly taking these little simple setting, a small duration of time, raising the stakes, but really investing time in making three-dimensional individuals that through whom we can see the human condition in a manner that is timeless and universal. And it's kind of less about the construction of this perfect setting, as it were. And so I do like to kind of explore it in that way. And I don't think, and I'm kind of interested in, we've talked about this a little bit, Anne's latest book, Commonwealth, which is terrific, is closer to an exploration of your personal experience than a lot of your work in the past. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And so, what kind of, maybe that's in my future too, I don't know, but so what prompted that kind of moment where you're like, I finally want to investigate this?
I have a costume department and a scenery department and light, and I have all of these little businesses in my head. And I've worked very hard on making interesting trees and interesting dresses and interesting vistas, but it's the same book. I only write one book, and I put so much energy into hiding the fact that I am writing the same book.
Well done.
But I mean, at some point, I just thought, Jesus, I'm 53 now, so however old I was when I started that, and thinking, what if I didn't put all of that energy into this wild, far-flung setting? And I brought all of that energy back to the story that I'm always writing. A group of strangers who are thrown together by circumstance and form a community. Do you know Bob Butler, Robert Ellen Butler? Bob Butler, Good Scent from a Strange Mountain, one of my all-time favorite books. Bob Butler teaches creative writing like nobody else I know, and he doesn't have his students, and he has a book about it, and I don't remember what it's called, but look up your Robert Ellen Butler teaches creative writing book. He doesn't have his students write stories in workshop. He's like, if the story is bad, it cannot be fixed. There is no point talking about it or marking it up. And what he teaches his students to do, without teaching them how to write per se, is how to operate from what he calls the white-hot center of yourself. That you are either telling your own truth, and every time I talk about this, I do this. I'm always finding myself tapping my sternum. You're either talking about the things that are unbearably important to you and central to your life, and maybe those things change over time, but probably they won't. So my center, myself, as I desperately try not to write about this, as I try to write about something else, I am always going to be writing about the construction of community, our responsibility to one another. I'm going to be writing about race. I'm going to be writing about class. I'm going to be writing about wealth and poverty. Those are the things that I am made of, that I care about, and as much as I try not to write about those things, I will be. And so by dressing it up, by doing the scenery and the setting, and I love doing research, that's so fun. It makes me feel like I'm doing something different when I'm never doing anything different. Not in my writing and not in my life, not in my... I'm serious, have dinner with me sometime. It's just that my husband can attest, it's the same old thing over and over.
But so finishing that, so what brought you then around to say,
I was just tired.
Yeah, I don't want to make a comment.
And I also had this crazy idea. Like, if I wrote the book, so my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and I went into this new reassembled family, which sounds a little bit like, and half of us had money and half of us didn't have money, and all of these things. So like, what if I just wrote the book I'm trying not to write? Like, maybe I would be free from some of these things if I wrote something that was closer to the truth. Although, like Zadie, it's not, oh, this is the truth, this happened. It's, this is the truth, these are the things I'm afraid of, these are the things I was afraid would happen, But the center of it is the same. There I am. The center of it is still the same.
Yeah.
Very true with
we've
you.
We've talked before about, or you've talked, and I've listened.
And you. I just can't stop running my trap.
I couldn't very well talk about your father, having never met him. But you did. One time we had a long conversation, probably about our fathers, and you were talking about your father, the policeman. I was thinking at the time, this guy hasn't turned up in Anne's work before, at least not in the way. But he's all over. He's all over this book. He and his cop friends. I suspect.
He was dying when I was writing it, and I knew he would die before I finished it.
Oh wow, yeah. Well.
Yeah, wow. That
He's
yeah.
Well, how proud? All I can think of is how proud he would be.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No. No, my father could not have stood this.
Really?
No, absolutely not. I never, if I had thought that, if my father had made some astonishing recovery at the 11th hour and 59th minute, I would have stuck it in a drawer.
Yeah, that's the way I felt about my memoir too. But I
Serious.
yeah.
And can I just say, Elsewhere is forever my very favorite Russo.
Well,
I love that book so much.
I wish I could say the same. I was going to say something else about your father, but no, his fingerprints seem to me to be all over this book in the most loving way, and one of the things that I particularly loved about this book was that it is so funny, despite being serious. It is so funny, And part of what I love most about it is just the cop humor. Clearly, you've been imbibing that for a very, very long time, and you didn't have to guess what it was like.
Right, and it was wonderful to say to myself, well, okay, I'm allowed to use this now.
The story about where the dog ends up driving, was that in?
No.
I've told that joke since reading that. I've told that joke without all the surroundings. It's a wonderful joke. Getting had to tell you the joke later. It's a wonderful joke, and I have just lifted that out of your book and told it as kind of like my own story.
Can I tell you?
Yeah.
I was 30. This was 23 years ago. I went to Alan Gerganis' birthday party, and Dick Bausch told me that joke at a party.
I believe it. I believe it. All right. Okay.
So now I'm going to ask the reading question.
Oh, yeah.
Look how you both stood. So one of the reasons that I am alive on this earth is to make you read books and to make you buy them from your local independent bookseller, which you will do today, which is a bunch of grapes is selling books, and you will go out and buy them. And that's important. That's how we keep the economy alive, folks. So I love to talk about what people are reading, what I'm reading, what you guys are reading, and how reading influences our work. And it's funny to me, people ask so often, can you read while you write? And I always say, reading and writing to me are like having two legs to walk on. And it's just, it is so tangled, so completely connected, what I read and what I write, how I think about things, how I'm inspired by things. I'm writing a book right now in the first person because I read Liz Strout's novel, My Name is Lucy Barton. And I hadn't been interested in the first person in a while, and I read that book and I thought, oh, I'm all wrong. I want to do this again. So everything that I read, I steal, it goes into my work. I'm so excited by the books that I read, so I always want to know what other people are reading and how those books are impacting what you're working on.
Oh, me. I read, most of my reading, I read with three friends, and we've been reading for 13 years. And we have dinner on a monthly basis to discuss a novel. We do projects so we'll do, we did a year where we did Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau, Dickinson, and then 4 Mark Twain novels, and then 5 Faulkner novels, as kind of this American.
1 year?
Well, it was maybe 14 months, but sort of American, the American voice, trying to figure out what the American voice as it was evolving. And we just are finishing. We've just read 9 Philip Roth novels in a row, which has been fascinating. I had never read a word by Roth.
What was your favorite?
Well, we started with Portnoy, and then we moved chronologically forward, and we're ending. One of the great things about Roth is Human Stain and American Pastoral come quite late in his career, as it were, and are amazing books. I mean, among his best. So it's fun to sort of see the thread of his work and how it evolves. And I enjoy reading. We enjoy reading chronologically across an author because you learn so much more than just reading a single book by an author. You start to see patterns and how they're dealing with an issue, recurring themes, the way their talent is evolving or their artistic approach. In the summer, though, I read a lot of crime. Library of America, which I don't know if you know, is this nonprofit institution that publishes all the great works of American literature, and they publish, including all of Roth's works, the works of Hammett, Chandler, Elmore Leonard, Ross MacDonald, and reading Raymond Chandler's collected works and then Ross MacDonald and then Elmore Leonard is totally fun because it's L.A. in the 30s and 40s, and then it's L.A. in the 50s and 60s, and then L.A. in the 70s and 80s, with people getting killed all along the way, but in a different type of car, with a different crook, and it's great, to see how Los Angeles itself evolves over the course of that.
Absolutely. Throw in some Didion.
That's right.
Can I recommend a book for you?
Yeah,
that I just read, because I don't read a lot of crime, and I just read a book, I think it's coming out in October, called Bluebird by Attica Locke. Blew my mind. Write that down. She is fantastic. It's about an African-American Texas Ranger in East Texas. Guys, this is a good book.
Thank you.
I would also say too that what you're doing right now with these crime writers seems to me to be a natural extension of what you were doing with Whitman et al. If you're looking for the American voice, just hearing Philip Marlowe's voice going through Lou Archer's voice, going through, well, who would the Elmore Leonard?
The characters from Get Shorty, for instance.
And there's something so profoundly American about those voices.
Yeah. And they've revered all around the world, the American noir is seen as the greatest noir in the world, in essence, and as a foundation for the way people interpret American literature. So it is fascinating that way too.
It's hard to imagine that there would be anything like Scandinavian noir without it.
Well, that's true. It sounds great, but yeah, it's actually growing from it. Yeah.
So you didn't tell me what your favorite Roth was of those 9.
Oh yeah, what is that? Right now I'm finally up to Human Stain, and American Pastoral was probably my favorite out of all of them so far, and Human Stain could beat that. I think. I really.
No, Human Stain was mine. Yeah.
I still love The Ghost Writer.
Oh, I love the Ghost. Yeah, I love Roth. The very worst Roth novel is still better than anything else.
Like both of you, I read all the time, and I would never dream of not reading when I was writing, because I'm never not writing. So I just read all the time, and I suspect, like both of you, once you've been around for a while and people begin to know your name a little bit, you get sent an enormous number of books in the mail for endorsement. So I think about half of my time, or maybe a little more, is devoted to reading books that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up in a bookstore if I'd gone in, but they've been sent to me. They've either been sent to me by a writer that I may know a little bit about, or often an editor whose work and body who represents, who publishes other writers that I like and whose taste I trust. So I read an enormous number of these, and sometimes I'm a little resentful because I do have an enormous stack of books that I'm desperate to read, that I really want to read, but they're often Dennis Lehane, for instance, doesn't need my help, I offered it once, and he said, "No, fuck off." We're streaming this, aren't we, live? I can be a little bit resentful, because a lot of the books that I'm desperate to read and want to read, I'll have a stack of books by writers, most of which I know are enormously talented, and who might need a little bit of assistance from a writer farther along in his career. So I read a lot of those, and every time I run across, every time I'm feeling a little bit resentful about doing so much of this, I come across somebody that just absolutely blows the top of my head off. I was talking with Ann and Amor earlier about a wonderful novel that's coming out, and you don't have to worry about it now. It's coming out in 2018, called The Immortalists. So I read a lot of those, and then there are the books that September is a big reading month for me, because my wife and I always come to Martha's Vineyard that month. We spend almost the whole month here, and we do almost nothing but read during that time. And we start sometimes, as early as May, putting together our vineyard packet of books that we're going to bring. And during that time, I do only what I want, and I won't tell you what I want. But I don't want to embarrass myself or you. So then there are those. But then I also have this notion someday that what would be purest joy would be to take 6 months, 9 months, something like that, and just just choose a classic author and just read him or her from start to finish. Just read Towles. Just go someplace.
Oh my God.
Just go someplace and
gonna
read.
take you more than 6
Towles.
months.
Yeah. I might get through Barchester Towles in 6 months. But so that's my reading life, and like you guys, it informs because I read with the same larcenous spirit that you do. What can I learn from this writer? What can I steal? Especially in terms of technique. Oh, that was an interesting place to break off that scene, wasn't it?
Right.
And then going back to this most recent book of yours, I wanted to ask you about its structure because you were breaking off scenes in places that I never imagined, and breaking off a story, and then coming like 75 pages later, you get the ending to the story that was earlier, and you go, oh, I got to try that sometime.
Kids, don't try this at home.
That's right.
I read so differently now that I have a bookstore, and if that has changed things for you, I don't know.
It has only intensified.
Yeah.
It intensified the problem. Yeah.
Because not only do I not read classics anymore, I maybe read one classic a year, whereas it used to be I read nothing but classics and would read maybe 6 contemporary novels a year.
Right.
Everything is switched now. I only read things that haven't come out. I'm reading for things that I can recommend at the store, for people who are coming in, for people I'll be interviewing on stage. And again, I have that same experience just at the moment that I think, oh, God, I'd like to have 5 minutes to read what I want.
Right.
I read something that's so astonishing.
Yeah.
And there are so many more books that I could even physically put my hands on, much less read. I picked up a book 6-8 months ago because it was small and bright yellow. And it was called Chemistry, and it was by Wei Wang, first novel. Fantastic, absolutely loved it. I read a book that I finished yesterday because it had the front page review in the Times Book Review last Sunday, and the reviewer said it was funny. The reviewer said that he laughed out loud, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to laugh out loud right now about anything? And 2, that's the thing that people are always wanting in the store. The number one thing people want. I want a smart, funny book. I want a book that I can laugh and feel good about and not feel crushed by the ending, but not feel like an idiot for buying. In other words, I just want to read Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Over and over and over again. But now I can sell them Less by Andrew Sean Greer. So funny. Has anybody read that? It's just come out. Did you like it, Han? I just loved it. So it's called Less. You can remember that. I just read Trajectory for this panel, and it's so good. Your book I read ages ago. Your book I read as a galley because our books came out at the same time. I feel like I read your book years ago. Your book I just finished, and it's. I want to talk about this actually because you pack so much into these 4 stories. The word short should not be used anywhere near these 4 stories, but every story has an entire Richard Russo novel in it. They are such dense treasures, and your novels are kind of rangy.
Yeah.
You're always willing to go down the rabbit hole and tell jokes and riff. And these stories are like diamonds.
That's why I don't write more of them, actually. Thank you.
Seriously,
Thank you. I appreciate it, but you're right. I'm like the dog. I will chase the stick. And my novels are like that, and they're very loose-limbed and all of that. And the reason that I don't write more short fiction is that they have to be what you're describing. And thank you for describing them that way. But you have to hold the reins a little tighter, and then I'm used to holding them. And But thank you.
I always think Alice Munro is the most generous person in the world, because if I had one Alice Munro idea, I sure as hell would not throw it away on a short story.
Yeah.
You know, I would get a 400-page novel.
Just keep squeezing that until the last.
No. Amor, short stories ever?
Do I do? I do write them. I'm writing at several right now. I think I will do that. It'll be a part of my future. Publishing short stories, catching up again.
But Gentleman in Moscow is so expansive.
Right.
You are so patient in allowing these characters and these events to breathe at their own pace. Do you have the same problem that I do with something shorter of having to? I don't like to exercise control.
Right.
You know?
It's nice to see the whole thing unfold.
Yeah.
I really like. For short stories have really served me well, particularly as a younger writer, and I still kind of do this. I'm very interested in tone, a little bit like what you were saying earlier. I'm very interested in tone and the way that if you had a main character, even if it's in the third person, how did the language in this person's story differ from the language about that and from that person's perspective? You know, for me, like each person in the story, you tell the story differently the minute you shift it to perspective. The language, the sentence style, the structures, the observations, and so the short story is a great place to keep experimenting with that. You know, did I get the tone right to bring this person to life, even if it's just a small set of circumstances? And so I like it for that reason. It's a great place for me to kind of be able to work on a type of expression within 15 or 25 pages without having to spend 5 years on the experiment.
Does it feel like what painters do with studies?
Yeah, maybe it does.
It's like the small thing you get a chance to work out the major things within a small.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, it's sort of weird, arcane for me. But when Rules of Civility was done, I didn't want to write anything about the main characters, Katie or Tinker. I felt like everything I should tell you about them was in that book, and anything else I told you would undercut the value of that book. And so. But I was very interested in Eve. This character, Eve, was a real troublemaker in the book, who kind of disappears midway through to go to Hollywood in 1938. So I ended up writing 6 short stories that follow her to Hollywood.
Yeah.
People would like to read those.
Yeah.
Those would sell those.
Yeah. Tomorrow. So that was fun because it's kind of the 6. It's 5 people who meet her when she arrives over the course of time. So you get from 5 different tones as her life in Hollywood is kind of beginning to unfold.
And you know, that's very similar to Elizabeth Strout's follow-up to My Name is Lucy Barton.
Yes,
Anything
which is amazing. And
we should probably go because everybody's squirming and it's
Yeah.
Yes,
this
room is booked.
Please, these authors will all be in the men's room just down the hallway, so you can continue the conversation.